Hello, and welcome to the Mathematician's Podcast, the podcast where we follow the fascinating stories behind the figures that count in the history of mathematics. I'm Benjamin Cornish, and today we're taking a trip back to ancient Alexandria, that intellectual hotspot of the Hellenistic world, to meet a man who is my personal hero, Hero of Alexandria. But first, I used to have a friend who was a former mirror salesman. He worked in this tiny little shop, walls covered floor to ceiling with mirrors, a kind of glassy labyrinth really. You couldn't turn around without seeing yourself, and then seeing yourself, and then seeing that version of yourself trying to leave. Now my friend had one job that always gave him grief: stock counts. End of the month, every month, he'd sit at his desk, clipboard in hand, determined to get through it. But he couldn't help himself. He started counting the mirrors, 1, 2, 3, and then he'd glance into one, see 3 more reflections of the first 2, and start second-guessing everything. Did I count that one already? Or is that a reflection of the one I counted before? Reflects off the one behind me being reflected again off the display stand near the door? He tried numbering them with sticky notes once, but even those reflected. He gave up halfway through and wrote infinity on the form. His boss wasn't thrilled, but honestly, what did they expect? You can't do inventory in a place where reality has a recursive function. Eventually, he left the business, said he was tired of living in a world where he never knew if he was looking at the merchandise or himself. He told me, "I just couldn't see myself staying there any longer." Although, with the mirror maze still pointing at itself, an image of him might still be bouncing around. Hero, or Heron if you prefer his other Greek name, was a maker, an innovator, a gadget guy in an era where most gadgets were just sticks and rocks. Think of him as the tech bro of the 1st century. Only instead of doing unboxing videos, he was inventing the very idea of steam-powered, coin-operated vending machines and theatrical automata. Basically, the guy could have revolutionized the industrial age, if only, had the industrial age been built. Imagine being limited not by your imagination, but by the quality of the metals that have been discovered and mined and distilled so far. But before we start spinning alien wheels and measuring triangles, let's set the stage. Hero lived somewhere around the 1st century CE in Alexandria, Egypt, which makes him our very first proper Roman mathematician. Alexandria was the place where pretty much every big name of the last 10 episodes has come from: the engineers, astronomers, mathematicians, and philosophers. They all bumped into each other in the corridors of the great library and museum. So why does Hero matter? Because he represents the meeting point between abstract mathematics and applied engineering, and because his stuff still blows steam out of people's ears today. We'll talk about his life, his gadgets, his mathematics, and why he wrote almost 2 millennia ago still shows up in modern classrooms, engineering designs, and even YouTube videos about popular maths. Now, we don't know every detail of Hero's biography. In fact, most of what we know comes from his writings, and they suggest a man obsessed with machines, measurements, and making mathematics do practical work. He is believed to have taught at the Museum of Alexandria, which was basically the first research university. And from his works, we can tell he had a strong grip on geometry, mechanics, and, following in the footsteps of Philo of Byzantium, pneumatics. Yes, the art of using air pressure to make things move. What a breath of fresh air he was. The mathematical DNA of his predecessors runs through his work: Euclid's geometry, Archimedes' mechanics, Apollonius's conics. Hero turned those theoretical tools into theatrical contraptions, leaving behind a blueprint for what we now call engineering. Before we roll up our sleeves for the maths, let's talk toys, because Hero's toys were jaw-dropping. In fact, he could make your jaw drop automatically using counterweights and levers. First, the showstopper, the aeolipile. Picture a hollow sphere mounted so it can spin, with 2 bent tubes sticking out. Fill the sphere with water, heat it, and steam shoots out the tubes, spinning the spheres like the very first steam engine. Of course, Hero didn't use it to power a factory or a train. He used it for demonstrating principles, and maybe to impress his friends. But it should not go without note that this is a genuine steam engine. It converted stored chemical energy into rotational energy through the thermal exchange of heat into a liquid, then gaseous water. A revolutionary engine of steam, in that it revolved. Sadly, it would be nearly 2,000 years before the idea picked up steam. Next, here's theatrical automata. Hero designed stage machinery that could open doors, move characters, and even create sound effects, all without a single intern backstage. How? Ropes, pulleys, weights, programmed in advance. Essentially, Hero invented the concept of the mechanical algorithm, the original set it and forget it approach. Oh, and vending machines. That's Hero too. Drop a coin in the slot, the weight tips a lever, and water flows out. Holy hydration, Batman, a 1st century paywall for holy water. And as far as I can tell, the last time a religious institution took money off the populace for magic water. How about his fountain? Using a hidden reservoir of liquid, he could appear to create a self-filling fountain, which today we would consider a perpetual motion machine. In fact, it relied on the weight of the water pushing air up into a hidden reservoir, which then expels water up a thin tube back to the top tank. He also built an organ powered by the wind, which is the first documented case of green energy, a cart powered by falling weights on ropes turning cogs, which is marvellously close to a clockwork device. All these marvels were powered by a clever use of air pressure, gravity, and the geometry of motion. Hero's books on pneumatics read like a steampunk design manual, and they raise an irresistible question. If he understood steam power, why didn't the Roman Empire industrialize? Historians debate this, but most agree cheap labour, slave labour, and poor quality of metals meant there was zero incentive to replace humans and animals with machines. Talk about missing the train, literally. Alright, gadgets aside, let's put the maths hat on. Hero wasn't just a tinkerer, he was a thinkerer. His most celebrated result? Hero's formula for the area of a triangle. So that is, area is equal to the square root of s multiplied by s take a multiplied by s take b multiplied by s take c, where a, b, and c are the sides of a triangle, and s is the semi-perimeter, that is a plus b plus c, all divided by 2. Why is this cool? Well, because you can now calculate the area without knowing the height. This formula comes from geometric reasoning involving Pythagoras' theorem and a touch of algebra. For anyone who's ever stared at a scalene triangle thinking, where do I even drop this altitude? Hero's formula says, don't worry, I got you. Imagine you're trying to work out the area of, say, a triangular lake. You can't quite swim across it, so you can just measure the outsides. Let's do an example. If our triangular lake has sides of 13 kilometers, 14 kilometers, and 15 kilometers, the semi-perimeter is 13 plus 14 plus 15 divided by 2, which is 21. We can now plug that into our formula. So the area is the square root of 21 times 21 take 13 times 21 take 14 times 21 take 15, which is the square root of 21 times 8 times 7 times 6. So that is the square root of 7,056. The lake has an area of 84 square kilometers. Voila. Hero essentially gave us a geometric Swiss Army knife. Well, for triangles. He didn't stop there. He contributed to optics, defining how light reflects, and worked on mechanical geometry, calculating how gears and pulleys interact. In his book Metrica, Hero provides methods to approximate square roots. Basically, early numerical analysis. He used what we now recognise as an iterative algorithm, which is eerily close to what Newton would formalise centuries later. Here's how Heron's method works. We take an initial guess, so we call this g, for the square root of a number n. A good starting point is often an integer whose square is quite close to n. We then calculate the average of g and n divided by g. This new value becomes the improved guess for the next iteration. We repeat the averaging step with a new guess until the desired level of accuracy is achieved. The more iterations, the closer the approximation gets to the actual square root. Let's zoom out a little. Hero's era didn't have symbolic algebra, so everything was geometry-based. That made his achievements all the more striking. Hero's formula anticipates ideas about invariance, quantities that remain the same under certain transformations. His work on mechanics prefigures energy transfer and feedback loops, fundamental to modern engineering. In optics, Hero explored the principle of the least time for light reflection, a precursor to Fermat's principle in the 17th century. He argued that when a light ray reflects off a mirror, it takes the shortest possible path. This wasn't just a neat thought experiment, it underpins how we understand refraction and even modern fibre optics. Let me break it down. So essentially we have 2 points in space, A and B, and a surface. We are tasked with finding the point along the surface, P, such that the sum of the two segments formed AP and PB is minimised. This is equivalent to finding the ray of light that is travelling from A to B and reflected at P. The solution to this problem is to reflect the point B in the surface and then connect A to B prime, the reflected point. The point P then is the intersection of this line with the mirror surface. In other words, where you might think B is based on looking at the mirror from A. Even his pneumatics resonates today. Every time an engineer designs a fluid system, they're dealing with principles Hero described. Air pressure, hydraulics, automated control, they all trace intellectual ancestry to his writing. So what's the legacy of Hero of Alexandria? He represents the beautiful overlap between theory and practice. He reminds us that maths isn't locked in ivory towers, it's the skeleton key for invention. And maybe that's the big lesson. Ideas need not wait for the right time. They echo across centuries, sometimes dormant, sometimes roaring back to life when the world catches up. Hero gave us machines before machine culture, algorithms before computer science, and formulas still taught in classrooms. He's a one-man bridge between Euclid's abstractions and James Watt's steam engine. If history were the group project, Hero would be the guy who did the practical part and let the others add their name to the bottom. So, next time someone says maths is just numbers on a page, tell them about Hero, the man who turned geometry into gears and steam into spectacle. And that's it for today's episode of the Mathematicians podcast. If you can't wait for me next week, then you can connect with me on Blue Sky at mathematicians-pod or YouTube at un-applied maths. If you can wait for next week, then boy, do I have a treat for you. Over the last 30 episodes, we have been exploring mathematicians, but more often than not, they have something to say about philosophy, ethics, or religion as well. So to give us some more context on the history of the religion and how it intersects with mathematics, I have invited onto the show a world-leading expert in the religion of mathematics, or perhaps the mathematics of religion. I sat down with Dr. Daffen for a 90-minute interview, and we have had a very interesting discussion that turned me from a skeptic into what the Germans might say, an aufgeschlossener Mensch. That is, someone with an open mind. But this interview is so long and detailed that I did not want to edit down into under 60 minutes. So for the next 2 weeks, we will do part 1 and part 2 of The Injectives with Dr. Daffen. Until then, goodbye. The music today is Dance Macabre Finale by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more information in the show notes.